Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to my first draft profile episode. If you guys are not familiar with me, my name is Alex Katson. I primarily do work for Chargers Wire with USA Today Sports Media Group. I'm over there with Gavino Borquez, who you guys might know from his draft profiles on this channel last year and also this year. Super excited to join the guys and get you familiar with some potential Chargers targets as we approach the draft at the end of April. Uh, of course, if you want to follow my work outside of Guilty as Charged, I'll be here all draft season. But if you want to hang out and see some more of my stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen there. I'll be evaluating prospects all draft season long for both Chargers Wire and my own website, Neptune Scouting, which you can find on Twitter at Neptune Scouting, just the way that it sounds. Last week, I had the pleasure of attending the East West Shrine Bowl in Las Vegas, as well as the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. So today we're going to look at one guy from each of those games that stood out to me as potential Chargers targets in the draft. We'll start with the Shrine Bowl, where Trey Dean is our guy we're going to focus on today. So a little bit of background. Trey Dean is a safety out of Florida. He's a fifth-year senior. He used the COVID year of eligibility to come back for his fifth season in 2022. He's 22 years old. He actually turns 23 at the end of February, so he'll be 23 as a rookie. At the Shrine Bowl, he came in at 6'2" and 5/8 inches and 211 pounds. So pretty big for a safety. That's height and weight that you don't typically see from a guy playing in the secondary. Um, he is from Georgia. He went to Dutchtown High School, where he was a four-star recruit in 2018. He was also high school teammates with Will Anderson, who is probably the best player in the draft, depending on your opinion of him and Jalen Carter, the Georgia defensive tackle. But I think he's the best player in the draft. So that's a fun little fact there. And then while Trey Dean was in high school, he was actually recruited by Chargers DB coach Derek Ansley, who was at Alabama at the time. So there's a little bit of a connection there, which always is something to keep an eye on for guys that they're going to draft, especially as you get later into the draft. Um, Dean ended up playing in 9 games in 2018 as a true freshman because Marco Wilson, who's a cornerback for the Cardinals now, got injured, and so Dean got inserted into the lineup. He ended up playing well enough that he earned all SEC freshman team honors. He's also been a 4-time academic honor roll honoree for the SEC. So smart guy. He's an education sciences major, so probably a future in coaching once he's done playing. Career stats, he's got 255 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 4 interceptions, 18 passes defensed, a forced fumble, and 3 fumble recoveries in 57 career games. So super experienced guy. Has played at least 9 games in every season, all 5 seasons that he was at Florida. And then this year, while he was at the Shrine Bowl, he actually won defensive MVP of the game. It was a pretty hotly contested defensive battle of a game. So to win defensive MVP is a pretty high honor at the Shrine Bowl this year. Some strengths. Dean is a super versatile player. He's played corner. He actually, when he made all SEC freshman team, he was playing corner in place of Marco Wilson, like we talked about. He's played nickel. He's played safety. He's played dime linebacker. He's done everything that you could possibly ask of a guy. Like it says on there, all SEC freshman honors at corner, and then moved to safety in 2020, but didn't start. Played a ton on special teams, and then started at safety in 2021 and 2022, where they kind of moved him around and had him do a bunch of different things. He's a super good weapon in man coverage, especially against tight ends, because of that size that we talked about. Again, that 6'2.5" frame, and he's also got the athleticism to run with tight ends down the seam. And so he's going to be someone who is a eraser of tight ends in the NFL. He struggles a little bit more with slot receivers when he's lined up in the slot, but he still has the change of direction ability to hang with those guys. I don't think he's going to be like primarily a slot in the NFL because he's just not going to be able to run with those guys every single time, just the way that they release off the line and everything like that. But he is going to be someone that you line up over a tight end and feel good about all the time. He's also a really good run support player. Super eager and fierce run fitter, both from his deep safety spots and from overhang spots. So if you're not familiar, overhang is basically a linebacker that's lined up over an edge rusher, kind of over the formation of the offense. So Think about like outside linebacker, basically. So that's where we kind of talk about that dime linebacker position that he played at Florida. Florida had him roll down into the box a lot to play that sort of role, and he was really good at it. He fits the run really, really well, which obviously, if you watch the Chargers last season, you know is an issue for them. So could be a potential option there. He's also got really strong hit power and pursuit ability. Excuse me. So he's someone that even if the running back isn't coming to his hole, he's always going to be around the ball. Um, some weaknesses. He can be a little bit slow to trigger from his deeper alignment. So a lot of time when he's lined up as a deep safety, he's a little bit slow to read and react action in front of the field. Um, he looks a lot more comfortable aligned closer to the line of scrimmage. So I think he's going to be much more of a box safety or a dime linebacker or a nickel. In zone coverage, he gets caught with his eyes in the backfield pretty frequently. He's pretty vulnerable to play action, especially because he is so eager to make a play in run defense that he gets caught kind of looking into the backfield and then receivers kind of slip past him in his zones. And then a lot of times I saw him worrying more about hitting his landmarks in zone than defending the action. So what I mean by that is that um, every player has a landmark of where they need to get to on a defensive play if you're playing zone. So, he and Dean will like literally turn around and run to that spot before turning back around to look at what's happening on the field. And a lot of times, by the time he gets there and turns around, the quarterback has already scrambled or the ball has already been thrown. And he kind of turns around and he's like, oh, the ball is here. So I would like him to kind of fix that a little bit and just, keep his head turned around at all times to see where the ball is actually going. Because sometimes hitting your landmark is not the most important thing. Um, and then we did talk about how he's a good pursuit player, and that's because he's got plus athleticism, he's got plus size, but he's not the best judger of angles down the field. So a lot of time he does have to ankle tackle people instead of meeting a ball carrier on their flight path. So kind of instead of meeting them at an angle where he can actually like make a hit or force a guy out of bounds or something, a lot of times he ends up having to kind of curve that angle off and pursue a guy from behind and kind of snip at their ankles in order to bring him down. So, in summary, Dean received a 6.55, which on my scale is about the middle of the fourth round. I love his man coverage skills and his versatility, but I do worry that NFL offenses are going to expose his eyes in the backfield and slower instincts when he's lined up deep. I also don't think he's really twitchy enough to be a full-time nickel corner, which makes his role in the NFL a little bit of a projection early on, at least until he kind of figures some stuff out. He does have a ton of snaps on special teams, and so he's going to provide value for a team um, right away, no matter where he goes. But I do think that as far as a defensive role goes, it's going to be a pretty limited thing where you're going to bring him in as kind of a dime linebacker to either fit the run or defend a tight end in man coverage, and you're going to kind of try to avoid doing anything else. And even then, NFL offenses can kind of exploit that by running play action and kind of fooling him off the action and then getting the ball out to his man. Um, I could see the Chargers picking him kind of in that fourth, fifth round range as kind of the spiritual successor to Mark Webb. What I mean by that is basically Derwin James's backup as that kind of money backer role. We saw Mark Webb run a ton of that in training camp, especially when Derwin was injured. But obviously, then Webb got injured, and then he ended up on the practice squad, and now it's kind of unclear how the team feels about him. They need to add another safety to the room anyway, with Nas Adderley probably leaving in free agency. So you've got Alohi Gilman and JT Woods, both of whom Gilman played well at times, and Woods barely played because he can't tackle. And so there's going to be some depth added to that room, I think. And I think Dean is a guy where you can add him to the lineup and kind of take some pressure off of Derwin James and let him roam around a little bit more while Dean kind of focuses on erasing those tight ends. Especially with Derek Ansley's familiarity with him, recruiting him at Alabama, I think that this is someone to definitely keep an eye on early day 3 in the draft. So now we're going to pivot to the Senior Bowl, and we're going to talk about a wide receiver. Maybe not the one that you guys think. Obviously, Jaden Reed had a great week at the Senior Bowl out of Michigan State. Was kind of like unanimously the big winner of the week. Unfortunately, I did not have enough tape to do a full evaluation of him. So instead, we're pivoting to Houston receiver Nathaniel Dell, who goes by Tank. So Tank Dell, who had a great first 2 days of practice in Mobile and then sat out the rest of the week because he played well enough that he didn't have to do the rest of the week. His agent told him, "Hey, your stock has gone up as much as it's going to go. You're good. Let's go ahead and sit out." So some background on Tank. He's a wide receiver out of Houston. He's a redshirt senior, so same high school class as Trey Dean, but he did take a redshirt year in 2018. He's 23. He turns 24 on October 29th, so a little bit on the older side for a rookie, but still kind of around that like 22, 23, 24 range. He did come in super small, 5'8" and 3/8, 163 pounds. So one of the smaller receivers in recent memory. Obviously, our rivals across town, the Rams, have Tutu Atwell, who is a similarly tiny receiver. But Dell's a little bit different of a player, and we'll into that in a second. Dell originally committed to Florida International before going to Alabama A&M in 2018. Florida International actually ended up pulling his scholarship offer, and so he went to Alabama A&M because a high school teammate of his dad was an assistant coach there. He got a hip pointer in the first game, and so he ended up redshirting that season and then transferred to Independence Junior College, which is where Last Chance U was filmed for a couple seasons. It actually left the season before Dell got there. He ended up being the leading receiver at Independence in 2019 and was a 3-star recruit out of junior college, and then picked up a scholarship offer from USF before they rescinded his offer also. So 2 different Florida schools dropped his scholarship offers, which was a big deal to him because he's from Florida. So he ended up deciding to go to Houston going into 2020, where he really blossomed into a NFL draft prospect. Um, this year and last year, 2021 and 2022, he was on the All-American Conference first team. He was also a semifinalist for the Bolitnikoff Award, which is given to the nation's top wide receiver in college football this season. He led the country in receiving yards and touchdowns, so almost 1,400 receiving yards and 17 receiving touchdowns. He was also sixth in the country in total touchdowns with 18. And he was second in the country in receptions with 109. In his 5-year career split between Alabama A&M, Independence Junior College, and Houston, he's got 292 receptions for 4,285 yards and 43 touchdowns. That's in 50 career games between those 3 schools. He's also got 707 career kick return yards and 265 career punt return yards. So a little bit of versatility there. He was also a team captain this year, which, if you're not familiar with Tom Telesco's style, the Chargers love team captains, so that's something to keep an eye on as well. Tank is a super, super, super good separator. He's got short area quickness for days. He can beat just about anybody off the line of scrimmage. And that's something that you expect from a guy that small, that's gotten this far. What I was surprised by was that Dell also has super advanced footwork at the top of routes to create separation. So that release off the line is nice, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second if you're reading ahead. That release off the line is nice, but sometimes it doesn't always work. You know, there are those rare guys in college football that can hang with 4.3, 4.4 speed. And Dell has the footwork to break those guys off on curl routes and out routes and stuff like that when the DB thinks that it's just a go ball. Um, Speed releases are kind of his specialty because he's a fast player. But if you go back and you watch his performance at the Senior Bowl, it emphasizes that he's actually got a diverse set of release packages that also helped him win on the outside at Houston. So Houston had him lined up on the outside and in the slot um, throughout his career. And he's got way more releases than you would think of a guy his size. Really executes some of those more like outside receiver type, like those crossover releases and stuff like that, a lot better than you would expect from a guy his size. He's also a supernatural run after catch threat, like complete dynamite with the ball in his hands. We talked about his returner upside a little bit, and you can see it every time he touches the ball. He actually started as a running back back in Pee Wee football before he moved to receiver as a high school player, and you can see that in the way that he like naturally transitions from catching the ball to being a ball carrier and running with it. Um, he's got blazing speed, obviously, which is a huge plus for the Chargers, and almost always turns those 5 yard routes into 15 yard gains, which if the Chargers offense looks anything like it did last year with Joe Lombardi, which it won't because there's a new offensive coordinator. But if it did, be a huge boost for the offense as a guy who kind of has that upside. Some weaknesses for Dell. Obviously, his size is going to be a concern. There are not very many players that have succeeded in the NFL under 170 pounds. Dell did say in an interview at the Senior Bowl that he's trying to get to 170 pounds by March, so around the combine or so. But important thing to remember with combine weights and stuff like that is that those are usually fake. Players have certain benchmarks that they want to hit. So you'll hear every year about guys like Dell or Bryce Young too, who are trying to hit certain thresholds to weigh in and show teams that they can quote unquote play at that weight. So for Dell, it's 170. For Bryce Young, it's closer to like 200, 210. And basically, they're going to weigh in at the combine at those weights, and then they're not going to do any of the drills or anything, and people are going to be like, why aren't they working out? And it's because all of that weight that they've added is water, and so they're not going to work out because it's not real. So he's going to play in the NFL under 170, long story short. And that's a not a deal breaker, but it does make his pro projection pretty tough because, like I said, there's not a lot of guys that have entered the NFL and succeeded under 170. Being 5'8" also doesn't help. It's not a deal breaker, but it's not ideal. Obviously, we've seen guys that size succeed before, but you'd like guys to be a little bit taller, especially in this day and age. Um, he's likely not going to be someone that handles press coverage or blocks well in the NFL, and so for that reason, he's going to be pretty slot limited, which plays into his Chargers fit, as we'll talk about in a second. Kind of going along with the size problems, he's not going to be a great contested catch guy. That kind of slider frame that he has makes him more vulnerable to pass deflections. Corners that can run with him are usually also able to beat him at the catch point because they're a little bit bigger. And his hands just aren't strong enough to overcome the fact that like any hit basically like looks like a huge car crash of a hit because he's tiny. Um, Houston system also didn't ask him to run a ton of different routes because they run the air raid. So he's mostly running a go or a curl. And then if he's in the slot, it's usually either a drag or like a blaze out or screens. I'm not super concerned about this because of how advanced his footwork is, but it could be an issue early on for him, just as he kind of adjusts to running a full route tree. He's super advanced running the routes that Houston asked him to run rather. And so it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but also it might be a little bit of an adjustment for him kind of coming into the NFL. So that's something to watch as in his rookie season. So in summary, Dell got a 6.71 on my scale, which is a high fourth rounder. Talent wise, I think he's a better player than the fourth round. I really like his run after catch ability, his returner upside, his ability from the slot. But my grading scale is not usually very favorable to players who are size outliers. And I do think that his height weight combo is going to be enough for some teams to just take him completely off the board. But there's also going to be some teams that don't care. It's going to be kind of similar to the Tutu Atwell situation a couple of years ago, where I'm sure a few teams had him completely off the board because he was tiny. And the Rams said, we don't care. We're going to take him in the second round. So I could see Dell getting as high as the second, but I think that the third or fourth round is probably more likely for him. As far as the Chargers go, I think that Dell makes the most sense if Keenan Allen doesn't end up coming back because Dell is, like I said, going to be limited to the slot in the NFL because of that size. And the Chargers already have a slot receiver in Keenan Allen. And so if Keenan is a cap casualty or gets traded or what have you, I think that Dell makes a lot more sense. But also that short area quickness and the deep threat ability, the speed that he has and everything would be a huge addition to the Chargers receiver room given what they have currently. So I could still see him being someone that they end up taking, even if Keenan Allen does come back. But I think that it makes a lot more sense if Keenan Allen is not back on the team in 2023. So that's going to do it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, I'm super excited to join Guilty as Charged for the entire draft season to talk about these guys and get you familiar with some of the prospects the Chargers might select in April, so that you kind of have some background if the Chargers do end up taking any of them. Let me know what you think, and like I said at the top, you can follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson. I'll be doing draft work all season for Guilty as Charged, Chargers Wire, and my own website Neptune Scouting at Neptune Scouting on Twitter. Thanks so much. See you guys later.